Do you want to get better draft classes in MLB the Show franchise mode? Well, this video is for you because today I'm going to show you my strategies after hundreds of drafts at this point to get you consistently the best classes that you possibly can. Scouting and drafting is my favorite part of MLB the Show franchise mode, and I've finally done the research this year in MLB the Show 26 to feel confident that I'm going to give you the best information that I can. What I'm going to do today is go through what I call my A plan, a strategy that you could use in every single draft to get a good draft class. But not all classes are the same, so I'm going to show you different variations and how to be flexible. But the most important thing to get better, let me just say this up front, is to do more drafts and practice. But even if this is your first draft ever in franchise mode, this video is going to help you get a good one. Every scouting guide, of course, begins before you actually start scouting with hiring your scouts. And you can see the three that I've chosen here. They all specialize in one particular thing that I'm going to use them for. Edmundo Weaver at the bottom here is the cheapest discovery scout that I could find who has 90 or more discovery, because in the beginning here of my A plan, he is only going to discover. So that's all I'm worried about. That's the efficiency does not matter. Just get the highest discovery that you can. I always hire this guy first because then I know how much money I have to look at my other scouts who need to be a little better. So we're looking for 90 plus efficiency for a position player scout. At the top here, Morcality has 93 efficiency and 97 position player. So he's going to scout quickly and he's also going to scout accurately. And then my pitcher scout, Tommy Martins here, is as good as it gets because he has more than 95 efficiency. He has 96, which means he's going to scout as fast as possible. And of course, he has a 98 rating for pitchers, so I've got a lot of confidence that Tommy Martins is going to give me good reads on these prospects. For my A plan here, I like to break down drafts into three parts. Your first round pick, then your mid-round picks, which are picks 31 to about 100, and then finally the late rounds, which are picks 101 to 200. So we'll start with that first round pick, and I'm going to begin this guide with the White Sox because we have the #1 overall pick, so that if there is a generational talent, I can make sure I get him and show you how to find generational players. If you don't have a high pick in the first round, let's say you pick at 23rd, my recommendation is immediately to go to my mid-round strategy, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But since I'm beginning with the White Sox and the first overall pick, I can select anybody in this class. So how do we decide who we want to scout since there's so much talent at the top of the board? Well, let's first look for generational talents. In my experience, generational talents can be found anywhere from the first ranked guy all the way down to about 20th in the draft class. So make sure you're taking a wide view. Make sure you look at a lot of guys because especially between about 10 and 20 is oftentimes where they're lurking. Let's start by looking at someone who is absolutely not going to be a generational talent, just to check this off the list. If you ever see a player whose potential and overall range are exactly the same, that is generally somebody that you don't want to scout. When you open up someone's profile and it looks like this, it's way too good to be true. Even the best prospects that you will ever see in this game do not have maxed out everything for their stats. So William Ryder here is a fake out. Don't fall for this. What you want to look for is players who have a max starting overall somewhere between 77 and 81 and max potential of 99. So both Russell Napier and Robbie McGrath both fit the bill there. So Russell Napier with 80 max overall and 99 max potential. He's also 19 years old. Generational prospects are almost always going to be 18 and then sometimes 19. So Napier is checking some boxes for me. I definitely want to look at his profile. So when I open up his profile here, immediately I see some red flags, and that is in his defense. It is way too good. I find that looking at present attributes for players is a very good giveaway as to whether someone's going to be great or if they're too good to be true. If you look at Russell Napier's reaction stats and fielding stats, they're way too high right out of the gate. Almost no prospect ever starts with 90 plus defense in all these attributes. It's just too good to be true. I would not scout Russell Napier. Just in my experience, you're going to be disappointed when you look at his profile, but let's take a look at Robbie McGrath because he also has that overall and potential range that we're looking for a generational talent. But again, I open up his profile and those contact stats may be a little too good to be true. That being said, the rest of his profile is fairly well-rounded and there's not too many outliers, so McGrath might actually be somebody that I'd want to take a look at. As I continue a little further into this class, though, I'm seeing this guy here, Russ Ludwig, who's ranked 15th. And again, he has the ranges that we're looking for, and this profile is very promising. I'm not 100% sure that he's generational, but what's important to look at here is all of his hitting stats and defensive stats are very well rounded. None of them are crazy outliers up to 99, but they all are in the green, besides power versus left. This is a realistic profile and somebody who could end up being generational, and this is the first guy that I want to scout. And as I've been recording this, I've been looking at all the players in the first round, all the position players in the first round, because there's other guys I'm interested in as well. Like this 23-year-old player is pretty interesting. We may come back around to him. The number 1 ranked player in the class also looks like he could have a fun power profile at first base. And my recommendation to you here is to always consider the context of the position that you're scouting. Typically, first baseman, third baseman, and corner outfielders are going to have a little more power, and someone like a center fielder is going to have more defense and contact, as well as some higher speed. So we'll come back around and look at these guys, but first I want to look at Russ Ludwig. Now, what am I going to do with my other 2 scouts in week 1 as we're going through the A plan here, something you can do in every single draft class? Well, let's get our discovery scout, and we're immediately going to put him onto international pitchers. There's a couple reasons for this. First of all, the international region has the largest pool of players and also the most players that you're going to find in Discovery. The other thing is we are going to scout a ton of pitchers during this process because pitchers are always a solid fallback and a high value pick if you don't like the position players that are left for you to choose from. Now, since we're discovering international pitchers, I don't want to scout international starting pitchers yet because I want to make sure that I'm also scouting the guys that I've discovered, and I don't want to waste a week of scouting international pitchers when I'm going to discover some that aren't going to get scouted. I hope that makes sense. So with my pitcher scout, what I'm going to do instead is try to find a good closer. Closing pitchers are absolutely broken in MLB the Show franchise. You can find prospects here that are very good and can anchor your bullpen for a decade, if not longer. There's 2 options here. The one thing you can do is scout a very highly ranked closing pitcher that you might want to take in the 2nd round. And this will make a little more sense as we go deeper into this guide, but Alex Gerber is a great option because we pick at 41 here. He's ranked at 41. There's a decent chance that he'll be available. A lot of times what I like to do though in this first week is look at a non-ranked closer. Again, this is going to come back around as we get later into the scouting process and into the draft. But look at Jeff Ricks here. He's non-ranked, but you open up the profile and it looks really solid. He's got a max potential of 99. All of his stats are really well-rounded. There's a very good chance that if I scout Jeff Ricks, he's going to end up showing up on my board. You cannot draft a player that ends up as not ranked. So this is a risk, but it's one that I'm willing to take in this first week. So in my A plan here, if you're following my A strategy, your first week should look something like this. The best position player you've seen that you might want to take in the first round, a closer or reliever, and then discovering starting pitchers. And of course, I'll put my positional needs here to reflect exactly the positions that I'm looking at. So second base, closing pitcher, and starting pitcher. Okay, so now that I've gone forward a week, let's open up the scouting menu here and see what we find. Russ Ludwig, who I thought could be generational, is going to be a bust. Look at how far he fell down the board. This is not going to be a good selection in the first round. This game will try to trick you a little bit, but nobody ever falls down this far and then bounces back. So I would give up on Russ Ludwig right here after 1 week of scouting. Jeff Ricks, however, is still not ranked. So we're going to scout him for another week, and I'm pretty confident that he's going to jump up the board. And in the meantime, we discovered 3 international pitchers. So I like to go to my recently scouted and see what we found, and we didn't find a whole lot, but we're going to discover international pitchers for another week. In the meantime, let's try to find a different position player for the first round here, and let's go with the number 1 guy in the class. I'm very interested in Corey Jansen because he looks like a power-hitting first baseman, and there's also very realistic attributes here for a first baseman. He's pretty slow, he doesn't have good arm strength, and he has a lot of power. And also another tip for you is that he has zeros in his profile for speed, sack bunt, drag bunt. This game does not generate players with 0 stats, so it's more likely that he's going to be on the higher end, which means he could be a great prospect, and I'm going to take a look at him next. Okay, so I've simmed forward another week, and this is getting exciting now. I think Corey Jansen is going to be very good and have high potential because he stayed as the number 1 ranked player, and his potential ranges are very realistic, and they're great. He also got some secondary positions of catcher and third base. I don't think he's the best fit for those positions because the defense does not look too good, but let's finish his profile because this might be our first round. And look at what else we found here. Jeff Ricks went from non-ranked to the 47th ranked player in the class, and he looks like he's going to be a very solid all-around relief pitcher. And the best thing about this is while you were discovering starters, you just found a closing pitcher that 99% of the time is going to stay on your board until the very end of the draft, because other CPU-run teams are not going to look at a guy like Jeff Ricks almost ever. It's very, very rare. So now that I've found a closer who's going to be a great late round option, I'm going to cancel my scouting assignment here, and we're going to actually start scouting those international pitchers. And since I'm now scouting international pitchers, I don't want to discover international pitchers anymore, but let's see what we found here, and it looks like we didn't find a whole lot of talent in Discovery, which is kind of unlucky. So let's switch over to a different region and discover the Central. And I've simmed forward another week here, and Corey Jansen is just looking better and better. A power-hitting first baseman with a really exciting profile. He could be generational. It's not guaranteed. I think he's going to be more so a high A potential player, but I think I know who I want to take in the first round. Since we have the first overall pick, and I know I can get Corey Jansen, I'm going to stop scouting for a first-round position player right now. However, if you have a later pick, let's say number 15, my recommendation is to have a couple of different options to choose from in case one gets picked ahead of you. And like I said before, if you have a really late pick in the draft, let's say 20 to 30, I would immediately start shifting to looking at more mid-round players, which it's now time to transition to showing you what I do for the mid-rounds. So I'm going to let my pitcher scout continue on the international region for 5 more weeks. We're going to scout this region for 6 weeks total. And we're going to continue to shuffle our discovery pitcher scout around, but look what we found in the meantime. A very good central discovery pitcher who has a realistic profile, so that is a good sign. So now, how do we find the best position players for the mid-round? Well, what I like to do is go position by position and look at players that are ranked between about 40 and 100. You want to look for one of two kinds of players here. The 18-year-old players who have a max overall somewhere in the 60s and a max potential of 99. Bud Cortez is exactly what I'm talking about here. When I look at Bud, he has very good contact skills, low power, and decent fielding. This is a profile that looks realistic and could be a player with very high potential that goes from, let's say, 78th before scouting all the way up to even in the top 10. I'm going to scout Bud Cortez and let's find out, but I also want to show you the other type of player that you want to look for here. And that other type of player is the older college player who might not have the same maximum potential range, but has a higher overall. So you can see that Fred Fodor here, his overall could go all the way up to 70. And I'll give you another tip here. A really good sign is when a player's max overall does not overlap with their minimum potential. So looking at Fodor, his max overall is 70, his minimum potential is 73. So there's a solid gap there. There's not a lot of overlap. When I open up his profile, very well rounded, and it's fairly realistic. He might be a little bit too good to be true, but I want to find out. So these are the kinds of players that I'm looking for in the mid-round. Those high potential young players, and then slightly lower potential but higher floor older college players. You can also look at guys like this who are the older players that have high potential ranges but lower overall. A lot of times these guys end up being really good as well. So this is what I do in the mid-rounds. I look at these kinds of players until I have a handful that I really like. All right, so I've gone ahead another week here, and you can see that Bud Cortez has stayed in the exact same ranking as he started, right there at 78. For me, this is a good sign because I liked his profile before I started scouting him. It felt realistic. It has a classic MLB the Show contact build, so I want to finish his profile and see if he jumps up the board. If Cortez had fallen down the board at all, let's say to 105th ranked, I would stop scouting him here and go find another one of those mid-round options. And now that I've discovered central pitchers for 2 weeks, I'm going to shift over to the East region for 2 weeks while my pitcher scout continues to scout the international region. And every so often, I like to come and check in at the recently scouted for starting pitchers and just see what we found. Looks like Justin Cordova could be a very good player if I wanted to go with him in the first round. Seems like Roberto Castro is moving up the board. He could be a very good mid-round option, so I like to just check in and see what I'm finding. And I've gone forward another week and look at Bud Cortez. He has gone from 78th up to 6th in the class. This is a perfect mid-round gem for us to take. Since the White Sox have pick number 41, there is a decent chance that Bud Cortez could be there. Another team may have stumbled across him and may like to pick him because the CPU just picks the highest ranked player on their board when it becomes their time to draft. So if they scouted Bud Cortez and saw that he went to 6 in the class, that might be the best player on their board as well. But that is why we're going to scout a lot of these kinds of guys who I might be interested in taking. Let's look at Fred Fodor next and see if he's pretty good, because what I want to have is just a wealth of mid-round options to choose from, and once I feel good about that, then I'll start looking later in the class. The good thing about 21-year-old position players like Fodor is you can scout them in just 1 week, so we've gone one more week ahead, and you can see that he fell down the board a little bit, and now I'm not quite as interested. I felt like he might have been a little too good to be true, and he is. The main reason I'm no longer interested is because the max overall dropped a lot to 53, between 53 and 63, and for a 21-year-old player, that's a little low. So let's go look at the third kind of player that I like in the mid-rounds, which is a high potential but lower overall second baseman here in Michael Gilliand. Again, he's got that good contact and defense profile, which is very common in this game. And because I can scout him in a week, let's just see how he looks. Now our Discovery Scout is done with pitchers because I don't want to scout or discover the West region because this is by far the smallest region. Only about 10% of players come from the West, so it's not really worth our time. We're going to stop here when it comes to discovering pitchers. And this is where we start to get into a little bit of a later round strategy here, and I'll give you 2 options at this point. Number 1 is you could continue to discover position players by region, starting with International, going to Central, and going to East, and seeing if you find anything there. For me, I haven't found as many good players in Discovery in this year's game, so I don't do this quite as often, but it is a decent option. But most of the time this year, I find myself going back to the scouting board and firing that Discovery Scout and hiring either another good position player or another good pitcher scout. You may not be able to afford the best of the best at this point, but Chris Hedger here has 97 rating for pitchers, and I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of efficiency for that accuracy. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and scout a different region for starting pitchers, and let's go ahead and look at the Central region. Now, this is very important. If you decide to continue with the discovery route, which I opted not to do this time, it's still a viable strategy, but you're not going to be able to scout as many starting pitchers in that case. In order to get a decent amount of scouting done on these starters, you're going to have to just pick one other region that was not international. So you've got to pick between Central and East. The best way to do that is to look at the board and see which region has the talent you're most interested in. So obviously Herb Clarkson was in the East region, which tempts me to want to look at East. However, as I get a little more into the mid-round picks, we've got Carlos Palacios, who looks really promising as a discovery guy in the Central region. You've also got Johnny Katz here, who looks similarly promising. Not to mention Andy Lutz, who has great control, and that is the most important stat for pitchers. So this is what I would do if you opt for this strategy. Kind of look at these mid-round guys and see which region looks best to you. And for me, I think it would be the Central in this draft class. But for this guide, I'm going to go with the double pitcher scout strategy and continue to look for good mid-round position players, and pretty soon we'll start looking a little later. And I've simmed forward a week here, and Michael Gilliand looks like he'll be a decent mid-round option for us if he's available. He has high potential, and he did not move too far down the board, so I'm feeling pretty solid about him. We've started to discover our pitchers, and let's just keep looking for some more mid-round options. And also, since I've now scouted the international region for 6 weeks, I'm going to move over to the East region for the next 5 or 6 weeks. We'll come back to that later on. So since I'm getting into the later weeks now, it's time to focus on my late round strategy. I didn't find that many good mid-round position players, but it's time for me to look a little later in the class because you can find gems back here like Mario Valenzuela. He's ranked 146th right now in the MLB, but he has a high potential range and an overall range that does not overlap. Max overall of 58, minimum potential of 65. And I open up his profile. It looks very well-rounded, very realistic. I'm pretty confident that he's going to be a gem. As I go forward another week, he stayed right in the same spot in his ranking, so I want to finish his profile. And we go forward another week, and he has moved up the board to 104. It's not a crazy high jump, but what that signals to me is he's probably going to have high B or low A potential. Now, keep in mind that Valenzuela is going to have probably a very low starting overall. We're talking like 48 or 50, so it's going to take him a while to get into the majors. But the thing with these kind of guys in the late rounds is their high potential gives them a lot of trade value. And that's a huge part of scouting and drafting, is you find guys with the most value that you can. So Valenzuela is somebody that I'm interested in. But let's go even further down the board to a player that is completely not ranked. If you look at Britt Gunn here, he has that same high potential range and a low overall, but there's a very good chance that he will end up becoming ranked just because of the profile. It's well-rounded, there's no crazy outlier stats. So I want to take a look at Britt Gunn towards the end of scouting here and see if he becomes ranked, because there's a good chance that I could take him in the very last round. This is a great way to maximize the value of your draft classes, to find guys like this, because most times the CPU is not going to look at Britt Gunn, and you can get a high potential player guaranteed in the last pick. Now, after 1 week, he's still not ranked, but you've got to be patient with guys like this. It can take a couple weeks for them to get on the board. Remember that closer that we looked at in the very beginning of scouting. So let's go forward another week here and see how he looks. We'll open up the scouting profile, and he is now ranked. Again, what this signals to me is he's going to be a high potential player. He's going to have a low overall, I know that, but he's going to be a valuable trade piece, and I would finish here. I'd stop scouting him here, but just for this guide, I'm going to scout him again so we can see his full profile and you get an idea of what he can really do. And in this last week here with my 2 pitcher strategy, what I like to do is go ahead and look at the pitchers that I've scouted and just see what my progress is for these regions. It looks like the guys in the Central have really not been scouted a whole lot yet. We're only at 40% for Solomon Massey, who looks very good and is a discovery pitcher that we want to look at. So I'm going to take this scout off the East region and do the last week with both of these guys on Central so we can get a little more progress. And now you have completed the scouting process. So let's get to the MLB draft. And let's take a look at our board here and see what we found over the last couple weeks before we even get to the draft. Obviously, we love Corey Jansen as our first rounder, and I don't think I'm really going to look at anybody else, but starting pitcher Johnny Katz moved up the board a lot. Starting pitcher Justin Cordova moved up the board. However, I'm not that interested in these guys for my first round pick, because you can find discovery guys like Carlos Palacios who you could get later on that might be just as good. And that is a big key to maximizing the quality of your draft classes. So keep that in mind. I'm just going to keep looking here. Remember, we have Bud Cortez, our best mid-round position player option. I'd love to get him in the second round. And as I keep moving along here, I see our closer, Jeff Ricks, who we scouted in those first couple weeks. And I'd love to get him with our last pick number 170, and there's a good chance that I will. And don't forget about our 2 late round position players in Mario Valenzuela and Britt Gunn, who admittedly don't look quite as good as a lot of the late round gems that I find, but I'm doing this all in one take, going through my full process so you can see a realistic scouting guide here. I'm not just resetting the draft classes. And yeah, so the late round I'm not super thrilled about, but I've gone ahead and loaded up my board with the guys that I like the most. You can see our 2 position players at the top here, a bunch of starting pitchers, our closer, and then our later round plays. And let's go ahead and start this draft, where we're going to take Corey Jansen first overall. He should be very good. And the hope here is that Bud Cortez does not get taken from us. But for those of you that have a later first round pick, this is a great option in the first round. Let's say you pick at 25. Bud Cortez, even though he started ranked 78th, is now ranked 10th, so I would be interested in taking him. But for us, let's sim ahead and see if he's still there, and he is. However, that discovery starter that I really liked is not. He got taken 13th, so we can't lean on him later in this class. Ethan Rush is still here, and he is an interesting player in terms of potential, but I don't like the control, and that is the most important pitching stat, and it is his lowest out of all the stats, so I'm not really thrilled about Ethan Rush. And at the end of the day, Bud Cortez, I know for sure is going to have high potential, so I'm going to go with him here in the second round. And this is where things can get a little tougher, because you see I've simulated ahead, and my board is getting a little thin. The good news is that Jeff Ricks is almost certainly not going to get taken, so we can get our high potential closer later on, and Mario Valenzuela and Brett Gunn should also continue to fall, so I don't feel the need to take them here, and I want to take starting pitcher Solomon Massey. He is almost definitely going to have mid-B potential, but if you look at his profile, he has very high hits per nine and very high control, which are the most important stats. This guy may not have 98 potential or whatever, but he's going to be a starter that's going to perform very, very well, and I'm going to take him here with our third pick. Now is kind of an interesting decision point as well here with pick number 110. I could take starter Roger Romero. I'm kind of leaning that direction over our late round position players in Valenzuela and Gunn, just because I don't think they're going to be the best late round guys that I've ever found. And this is the magic, the power of scouting discovery pitchers or discovering pitchers, is you're going to have a lot of them on the board. And I think ultimately, in terms of the most value that I could get here, Roger Romero is our best bet. And as you can see, our closer Jeff Ricks and third baseman Brett Gunn are still here. And these are the guys that started as not ranked. And that's why this strategy is so good for the late rounds. I don't think Brett Gunn is anything amazing, but just in terms of value at this point, he's a decent pick. So I'm going to go with him. And Jeff Ricks should make it all the way to the end, and he does. So instead of taking that number one closer that was on the board, if you remember from the beginning of this video, who was ranked around 40th, we're going to get the 50th ranked guy, also a closer, in the very last round. And he's going to have a potential. So Jeff Ricks will be the last pick, and I'm feeling decent about this draft. Now, when it comes time to signing your draft picks, you really shouldn't have too much of an issue here. But if you see somebody like Bud Cortez, who has lower motivation to sign, obviously you want to prioritize signing him because he was one of our best players. As I flip through, though, everybody else is looking pretty good, including our first rounder, Corey Jansen. So I'm just going to offer everybody exactly what they want. You're not going to run out of money here in the beginning, and try to sign as many guys as quickly as I can. And after I've gone through and attempted to sign everybody here, I'm going to put Bud Cortez on the board in the number one spot, and then we'll put somebody else with lower motivation, I guess Corey Jansen here in the number 2 slot. And that way we can get 5% motivation every 2 days for Cortez, and we'll be able to sign him by the end of the signing period. I would not fill in your third slot here because all the other guys are already above 50% motivation, and I really just need to maximize this motivation increase for Bud Cortez. I'll show you what happens if I put Solomon Massey on the board here. Bud Cortez motivation now only goes up 4% per week. So I'm going to just leave it with 2 guys, and that way we can get offers out to Cortez a little sooner. And once you've signed all your picks and there's just one guy left, you might as well just offer him all of the money that you have left, just to essentially guarantee that they will accept, and you don't need that money for anybody else. And now your hard work is all done. It's the beginning of August, and it's time to take a look at your draft picks. If you followed a lot of the strategies in this video, hopefully you will get a nice draft just like this one right here. Corey Jansen ended up being a generational talent, and you could see that he had a bit more of a unique profile with that elite power, and that is something that you will find a little more often this year, and that's why I said during that section to take into account the position that you're scouting for. The guys who are in the corners of the infield, first and third base, the corners of the outfield, they can have a little more power. They may not have that typical sort of well-rounded profile that you see with a lot of generational talents. And in the second round, we got shortstop Bud Cortez, who has 93 potential, and he's got that contact profile, which is going to perform very well through simulating in the major leagues. Admittedly, my mid-round picks were not as good as usual for me. You can find more A potential players here, but I just wanted to show you what I would do in a random draft class, and I think that Solomon Massey is a good starter. I told you that this kind of profile performs extremely well with good control and good hits per 9. He should develop nicely. Roger Romero's nothing special. He could be a trade piece for you. Really, the big pick in the late round here was that closer, Jeff Ricks. That strategy to look at non-ranked closers in the first couple weeks has really paid off for me, and I highly recommend that you give that a try. Overall, because we got a generational talent, this draft class is an A for me, but if we didn't get him and let's say he was 90 potential or something like that, I would put this right around a B+. It's a solid draft, but I wouldn't be surprised if you did even better than this. And one last thing here before I go, as you're learning, and also just for fun, you should also be looking at what the other teams did. Who did they pick? Because you might find some names that you recognize, like Johnny Katz. Remember, he was on our board, and he's a 98 potential starting pitcher. So if I went with him, it would have been great. Obviously, we got a generational player, so I'm not really worried about it. But it's great to see what other options were available in the mid to late rounds and just look at what the rest of the league ultimately did in the draft. And by the way, that 22-year-old mid-round second baseman that we looked at earlier in the scouting also has 99 potential. So if I went with him in the second round, we would have been very happy as well. We ultimately got Bud Cortez, who I'm still happy with, but as you can see, we had some good options, and I think this was a decent draft. I hope this video is helpful for you. Drop a comment below with any questions that you might have. Anything that I didn't go over, I'll do my best to help. And yeah, this is what I do for scouting and drafting in MLB The Show 26.